Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronymus. Laura Kortner is our executive producer and Anita Brockington our engineer. Joining us this hour is Lisa Radov. Lisa is executive director of Maryland Votes for Animals. You can find them online at www.voteanimals.org. Maryland Votes for Animals works with advocates, organizations, and legislators to pass humane legislation that will improve the lives of animals in Maryland. Founded in 2009, Maryland Votes for Animals has been successfully advocating for all of our Maryland's animals, and they are proud to have worked with a dedicated team of Maryland's animal organizations, advocates, legislators to pass or oppose important legislation affecting all of the animals in our state, such as creation of the Maryland Spay-Neuter Fund, which provides competitive grants to local governments and animal welfare organizations that promote and provide free spay and neuter services to pets of low-income Marylanders and to colonies of feral cats. They've strengthened Maryland's dogfighting law, closing a loophole in Maryland's statute by making possession of implements involved with intent to engage in dogfighting a crime in Maryland. They've put a ban through puppy mills on pet stores from selling dogs and cats. Instead, they host adoption events with local shelters, rescues, or private hobby breeders, and much more. Beginning now with the new 2020 Maryland legislative session, which opens in January, Lisa joins us to talk about what will be happening and what we all can do to be supportive of their important efforts. Thank you for rejoining us, Lisa.
Oh, thank you so much for having us, Dr. Hieronymus. It's an honor and a privilege to be on your show, and just listening to you talk about what we can do for animals makes me very fired up for the 2020 session.
Well, it's a new year in Maryland, as it is in many states. We have a new House Speaker. We have a new Senate President. Talk to us about the changes, because some people said these are really good for Maryland.
Well, I think that we did have a very animal-friendly President of the Senate and a very friendly, animal-friendly Speaker of the House, prior to this time, and we're going to definitely miss both of them and their leadership. But, with the changes, there's always possibilities. Sometimes there are ways of looking at things or chains of leadership, and, having the first female and African-American speaker in Adrienne Jones, who is very friendly to animals. She's wonderful to work with. And under Senate President Bill Ferguson, I think that we will see, maybe some issues come to the fore that maybe before had not been considered as important. So things, with new people comes some reshuffling, and we're looking forward to seeing some new committee chairmanships, some reshuffling of committees, and once again, with the changes, there's always possibilities. And in Maryland has been very much a supporter of animal legislation for companion, wildlife, animals, and for farm animals. So I think that we will see some movement that we haven't seen before.
Well, I was saying we had a prior guest on, Tammy Billups, who does healing with animals and humans together in tandem healing. And I was saying to her, I do animal readings, but I seldom work with abused animals or animals in captivity, and that I don't have the heart for it. It so distresses me that I so respect you and all the people like you who work to stop these horrendous things. I get so worked up, I just get so angry, and then I just completely lose my center. Talk to us a bit about some of the legislation you're going to be working on in 2020.
Yes, no, I'd be happy to do that. We have a lot of bills, actually, that we're looking at. We're going to be bringing back a bill that was introduced last year by Senator Clarence Lamb, and that was a ban on cosmetics testing on animals. Currently, California, Nevada, and Illinois have passed laws banning cosmetics testing on animals, and this bill would prevent them, companies in Maryland, from selling cosmetics that have been newly tested on animals. Interestingly, Baltimore County has Cody as headquarters, and they are a Leaping Bunny certified company, which means that they do not test on animals. So it happens to be that the vice chairman of the committee that hears this bill has a real interest in this because that affects a lot of the people in his district. And we were very pleased to see the kind of favorable hearing that we got last year. The bill was introduced very, very late. It was introduced on the Senate side. There was the Kerwin Commission. There were a lot of things going on. So we were basically told, hey, guys, we really can't report this out of committee this session, but please bring it back. So it is coming back.
Good,
so
good.
And we have high hopes.
Well, with an internet, people can go Google, animal testing, cosmetic testing on animals, and see the horrific ways in which they put rabbits in these cages with their eyes forced open and kept open, and then they put things in the eyes. That's I shouldn't do this, so we won't go there. I was going to say, and describe for us some of the other wonderful things the companies do to all these animals. But what do they do to other animals? How do they use animals for cosmetic testing? Don't tell us the worst, just tell us some of it.
Well, they'll use them they'll shave fur for skin testing. There's a lot of that kind of thing that goes on. And just really unnecessary burns that come up from these different kinds of preparations that they'll put on the various animals, and itching. Just think of yourself. I don't know if any of you or your listeners have ever been allergic to something that they've put on. That can make you nuts.
Yeah.
And think about it being like in the middle of your back, like when you get allergy testing.
Right.
Well, these animals, the same thing, except for, as you said, they're in small cages. So it's not even like they can go up next to a tree and kind of give it a good scratch.
What kind of animals do they tend to use in cosmetic testing? The rabbits we're familiar with because of
mice, rats, rabbits, small animals. That's usually who gets used on these.
Awful.
Yeah.
All right. So now I also, another cheery one. You're going to work a ban on wildlife killing contests. I don't even know these things exist until I read what you all are doing, and then I just fall on the floor.
Well, this is something. Last year, there was a bill about banning cow-nose-raised killing contests. And this is the same kind of a phenomenon where you take a group like fur-bearing mammals and they just wantonly kill them. And I'm not talking about responsible hunting, and I'm not going to talk about my personal views on hunting, but just in general, responsible hunting, people are using what are considered, I guess, acceptable hunting practices, perhaps using them for food, et cetera, et cetera. This is just as with the cow-nose-rays killing contest, killing these creatures that would come in, these pregnant cow-nose-rays into the Chesapeake Bay, and just to kill them, and just weigh them and get a prize for killing the biggest one. This would be for just killing groups of these like coyotes or foxes, and then just kind of piling them up. How many can we kill? And then these contests are often for money or for guns.
I remember reading about that in a state when they were trying to shut it down last year, where they would send young boys out with their newly bought rifles or shotguns or whatever they had. And the goal was to kill as many animals as they could in 3 hours, and whoever won got a new gun. Exactly.
That's it. You've got it.
It is just so perverse.
And you just wonder what is really being taught there. And, often, as what happens is, the young of these creatures are left to starve, and the animal carcasses, they're all just left there. You can't even make an argument that perhaps they're being used for food, perhaps they're being used for fur. Again, I'm a vegan, so
yeah.
I'm a little bit, biased in that respect. However, I do respect and understand when people, use hunting practices, and this is not that kind of a case. This is clearly just
this bill, ban on wildlife killing contests. When I read this, I just can't even believe people do this and that they can sleep at night, that they can even breathe.
And what they're teaching their children, as you said. You're sending young children out. Because you can get a hunting license as young as almost 8 years old in this state. So
wow.
It's very easy.
So this bill would prohibit random killing of animals in wildlife killing contests. As you point out, the bodies of the animals are left or discarded, and then their young are left to starve. Similar legislation passed in New Mexico and Vermont in 2018, California in 2014, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, and Arizona are also considering bills to make these cruel contests illegal. By all means, and thank you to sponsor Delegate Dana Stein. Is that right?
Yes. We've worked with Delegate Dana Stein on many bills. The cow-nose-raised bill, for example, last year, he was, jumped right in to sponsor this, and He is the vice chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee in the Maryland House. So that committee hears the bill.
Wonderful.
And he is a true animal advocate as well as an environmentalist. So many of the bills that we'll talk about tonight also have an environmental footprint. So we find that he is a wonderful friend in that committee, on these types of bills.
Yeah, so you also have one that deals with a particular pesticide, chlorpyrifos?
Yes, chlorpyrifos.
Pyrifos. Tell us about that.
So, funny story about chlorpyrifos. I had known about it and had been following it. Chlorpyrifos is a pesticide that almost 2 decades ago was banned from residential use at the federal level, but was still allowed to be used on citrus, almonds, grapes, and most popularly on golf courses. So I knew about it, and it was on my radar, and the Obama administration in 2015 had decided that they were going to ban chlorpyrifos for those other uses at the federal level. But lo and behold, the Trump administration was elected, came in, and the new head of the EPA in January of 2017, right as the administration came in, said they were not going to ban it, declined to ban it, said it was inconclusive, any testing that he had read, which is just patently ridiculous, frankly, because it has been known to be linked up with different kinds of human issues, especially with children, with different kind of developmental issues. It also is terrible for birds, poisonous for fish. With birds, it often softens the shells, and so the eggs don't survive. For bees, and I know that that we were involved in legislation to help bees in Maryland. So very important to protect all of these ecosystems together because they affect the environment and humans.
Yeah, of course. It's a neurotoxin. For years I was very involved in numerous campaigns fighting against the misuse and abuse of pesticides, insecticides, and fungicides, and actually fought a corporate golf course. This is back a long time ago. And I went and got from the EPA the dockets on each of the 33 chemicals that they used on their golf course, true witch's brew, from whether it was a teratogen or a carcinogen. I mean, bad stuff. And to think that this is what people who are out there having a leisurely game of golf are walking through, and the incidence in golf course keepers is much higher than average outdoor workers. And we certainly know the connection in migrant farmers who are exposed to so much noxious poison. So this is another bill you're doing. And then there's another one you're doing. We'll come back to it after the break. A ban on balloon releases. Some of these things maybe you don't think about until you hear from somebody like you, Lisa, and then you start to begin to think how some of these innocent things people do have such grave consequences. If you're just joining us, Lisa Radov is with us. Lisa is the executive director of Maryland Votes for Animals. I encourage you to participate in their work by making calls to your local senators and representatives. The session begins in January 3rd, I believe. www.voteanimals.org is the website, and you can stay up to date on where bills are when they come out of committee, when they go to vote, and you can make your calls to make your voice heard as well.
Hello, this is Jenny Brown, author of The Lucky Ones, My Passionate Fight for Farm Animals. You can learn more about me and my work as an animal activist and promoter of veganism at speakerjennybrown.com. You're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zahara Hieronymus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Lisa Radov is with us. She is president and chairman of the board. I think I said you were the executive director.
That's totally fine. Just don't call me late to dinner.
Lisa is president and chairman of the board for the Maryland Votes for Animals, Inc., and you can find them online at www.voteanimals.org. Here's another thing I was reading on your website. I don't even know these things exist. I don't know how much reading I should do. I didn't know that people have pigeon shooting contests.
I know.
And you all help make it illegal to hold contests where large numbers of pigeons are shot under brutal circumstances. What were people doing? What do they do?
It's the same kind of thing that we spoke of, with the wildlife killing contests that we're trying to make illegal this session, and also like the cow-nose rays. It's just, once again, just pigeons in a large kind of container, and then they open them up, and then as many as can be shot, and then they just put them on a scale or count them, and that person gets a prize. And then they're just waste.
Oh my God,
and so these are living
disgusting.
creatures that are just used, and in 10 seconds they're all dead, and then their little ones are left without somebody to feed them. And what's the point? Nothing. And so it's just an exercise in cruelty for sport. And I always say, because we're very big on the link, which is the link between animal abuse, domestic abuse, child abuse, and elder abuse. And when these kinds of activities take place, it sort of reinforces this kind of cruelty.
Mm-hmm.
So,
there's no question about that. I mean, they've proven that psychologically. That's not even a question mark anymore.
Well, for example, when you look at many of the shootings or many of the different murders, we don't have to go far. Recently, with the Annapolis Capital Gazette shooting, the shooter was found a week or so before, had taken his cat in to be euthanized. He just decided to stop feeding it, took it in, and said, "Oh, it doesn't want to eat anymore. You need to euthanize it." And so they euthanized it. And now they're trying to decide if they're going to use that in the case in terms of insanity. Should he have known that that was cruelty, starving the animal? But here we go again, that disconnect between caring for animals, caring for living things, and then going in and shooting up all those people.
And I know you all worked on a bill that makes a vet responsible, mandatory veterinary reporting, to report suspected animal abuse.
Exactly, which I have to be honest with you, when I read that report, I have to wonder where something didn't happen there.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that is going to be investigated, because that took effect in October of 2017, and this shooting and this euthanasia and the fact that the vet techs that saw the cat clearly knew that this was cruelty.
But
I had
euthanized
the
the animal
same exact
anyway.
feeling. I had the same exact feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, it's the same thing as medical personnel aren't real happy about having to report suspected spousal abuse or whatever, self-abuse, but when you're in a healing and caring profession, it's your obligation to do no harm. And if you're there and you're the first responder in the sense that this is where people come, then you do have an obligation as a member of the community, because just as you've pointed out, animal abusers are typically spouse abusers and abusers of women in particular, if not their children. All right, so on another issue, ban on balloon releases. Now, why is this a problem?
Well, this is, probably many of your listeners, and I know you and I have seen those pictures where you see different animals mistaking plastic for food.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's happened with the balloon releases is, hundreds of balloons get released, and they have to go somewhere. So they come back to Earth, and they might go into the ocean. They might get stuck in a tree. So a bird might pick it up and think it's food. A fish might think it's food. A small rodent might pick it up, or a deer coming by. And the fabulous thing about this bill is that it has such bipartisan support.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this bill is sponsored by Senator Clarence Lamb, a Democrat, and there is a whole coalition of other legislators who are interested in being co-sponsors, Republicans and Democrats, Senator Mary Beth Carrozza, Senator Steve Hershey, two Republicans, and Senator Ronald Young, who is a Democrat and an animal person who sponsored a lot of legislation himself.
And also, I noticed in your notes, Regina Boyce,
yes,
delegate, and Delegate Wayne Hartman are also co-sponsors.
Co-sponsors, and Regina Boyce, Democrat from Baltimore City, and Delegate Wayne Hartman from, Wicomico, and Republicans in those counties. So,
and Queen Anne's County passed this in 2019.
Exactly.
So that helps.
One of my board members was part of that, so she's very, very excited about this.
How wonderful.
Yes.
So another prohibition is on declawing cats.
Yes. And this bill, it takes me back a little to your discussion of how hard it was for us to get that other bill having veterinarians having to report cruelty.
Right.
This is sort of a similar feel. It's going to, we think, be a little bit of a heavy lift. So when I tell people about this bill and people get very excited because it passed in New York this year, I tell them it took 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying it's going to take us 10 years, but we have found that when you talk to people, that when they hear of declawing, they say, "Oh, my cat." The vet said that it was done with a laser. It was very kind, but declawing can't be done without removing the top knuckle of a cat's paw, and so it's a very painful and cruel procedure. So we're not thinking that it's going to be something that will easily sail through, kind of like we think the balloons, where it's pretty easy in terms of legislators signing on, bipartisan, not affecting an industry
right.
such as the veterinarians. So, this one will be more, we think, of an educational bill, the first session.
I don't think people know what's done to cats to have their nails pulled out.
Yeah, I don't either. So I think
I can tell you it made me cry as a child when my mother had one of our cats declawed because, people don't want their furniture scratched and this and that, but animals can actually be taught not to do that and they give them other scratching posts, etc. But, it's horribly painful.
Yeah, and you clip your cat's claws. We have on our furniture that there's that great sticky tape, and it's clear, you can't even see it. And once the cats put their paw in, it's like, I can't get my paw off. They're like, I'm not doing that again.
Right.
So we don't tend to have problems. And there are different sprays you can use. So there are many more humane methods than resorting to declawing. Now, what I will say is it's a civil penalty. It is not a criminal offense for a veterinarian that does a declaw. And there is an exception if it is needed for, quote, therapeutic purposes. Now, will people abuse it at times? Perhaps. But it still, if passed, would hugely minimize this cruel procedure. And it would raise so much awareness, as you said, because the public doesn't really know.
Well, there's so many things we don't know. I mean, I bet most people in our listening audience have never visited and never seen online what goes on in a slaughterhouse. I don't even want to talk about the particulars. That's what always amazes me. I love animals so much, and I am so sensitive to the horrors of their experience. I have such regard and such respect for people like yourself who can stand there and have such a wonderful approach to. I just get so furious and angry. I really lose it. I mean, I can do advocacy work, but I certainly can't be a leader because I just don't understand the insanity of humans. It's just that simple. I do not understand this sense of prerogative that humans feel entitled to abusing either themselves or animals. I
completely agree with you, and I often say that when I'm in Annapolis and I'm talking to legislators, I almost rarely talk about animals.
Yeah.
I'm talking more about how much it'll cost and, so many other elements of it, because once you just talk about the animals, a lot of the legislators, they don't really want to hear that. It's like, yeah, it's sad, but just like when you're talking about the slaughterhouses, there's an excellent book called Every 60 Seconds, and the author of the book went in undercover, and the slaughterhouses are located, much like the concentration camps were in Germany, outside of the cities, and there are separate entrances for the people, often immigrants, many illegal immigrants. They are the people who do the actual stunning and killing of the animals. The other entrance and lunchroom and bathrooms are for the white shirt staff, who are the regular residents of those states, such as like Nebraska and Iowa, where many of them are, and they have no contact with the slaughterhouses, just like the terms that we use for meat. You don't hear people talk about, chicken's wings. They're chicken wings. You hear terms like brisket. What is brisket? So I'm completely with you on that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, my. So another bill you all are working on is extreme weather.
Yes, and this has passed. We had tried to pass this. Delegate Dana Stein was the sponsor in 2015. There was actually a tethering portion to it, but about keeping dogs outside in extreme weather. And we really had trouble with it. With some of the changes in leadership, we feel that will be in our favor, although this bill was being was in the works before many of those changes. But many counties, about 10 counties in Maryland, have already passed extreme weather ordinances. Last year, there was a bill introduced very late on extreme weather, and there was just a lot of questions because there were so many versions out there in the counties. So we think we have a very tight version this year that makes it fairly general, because one of the problems that we had is where most of us live, you think, okay, just bring your dog in if it's under 32 degrees or over 90, or the National Weather Service has issued a weather alert. But we were getting objections from people who had these big hunting dogs that lived in sheds in Howard County and places outside, and they said, we're not bringing our dogs inside. We don't want a law that makes us do that. So this one is much more general, and we think is more enforceable, and sort of gives those parameters that I mentioned about the temperatures and an active weather warning by the National Weather Service, but also defines what a suitable shelter is, something that's properly ventilated, that can maintain the temperature of a dog, and give some specifics, that it's not, something at the end under like a crawl space. That's not considered acceptable shelter.
All right, so the extreme weather bill is sponsored by Delegate Mary Lehman, is that right?
Yes.
And I was wrong, by the way. The session opens January 8th, not January 3rd, right? January 8th.
No problem. People will be unpacking on the 3rd. It's always good to go down there. Sometimes that's the best time.
There's another really interesting bill that does affect a lot of people, and you don't think about it until you're one of those people in a divorce or a separation, which is a pet custody bill.
Yes, that is a very interesting bill. I was contacted after the session ended by some legislators and a chairman of a committee who said that one of their constituents had separated from her husband, and would I talk to her because she was unable to get in touch with her, husband from whom she was separated, about the dog, and didn't know if the dog had its shots, wanted to at least know, how the dog was doing. And I met with her, and and she herself is an attorney, according to Maryland law, unlike, children, there doesn't have to be any kind of dispensation because animals are still considered property. So just as your car, if he takes the car, you would have to wait until that divorce, even if it's 2 years. Animals fall, sadly, into the same category. So this law would close that loophole and say animals, there has to be some kind of an agreement as to custody prior to the divorce hearing. There's discussion about whether we would go farther and try to make this a best interest bill, which have passed in several states recently, that says in terms of who gets the pets or in terms of pet custody, that like children, that a judge would consider the best interest of an animal. Frankly, these are one of the bills that we don't have a sponsor yet, that the many groups that are involved, Animal Legal Defense Fund, this advocate herself who's a lawyer, I think the family law section of the bar may have some thoughts about it. It's still under discussion.
It's fascinating. The process, we're going to take our last break of the hour. When we come back, though, I'd like to talk a little bit about, Lisa, the actual process that an activist like yourself and an organization like Maryland Votes for Animals goes through in preparation for Maryland session, which is 3 months, right, each year?
Yeah, 90 days.
So we're different than some states, which have some full calendars, annual calendars all year long. What kind of preparation goes into creating bills for a legislative session, how you go about getting your sponsors and the committee assignments, and then what actually happens once a bill gets introduced? Because not everybody has ever worked in legislation as either a citizen activist or as just an interested resident, and I encourage you all to really take part. So learn more at www.voteanimals.org. And again, this is Maryland Votes for Animals and their website, www.voteanimals.org.
This is Matt Roney with the Earth Policy Institute, www.earth-policy.org. And you're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronymus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Lisa Radov is our guest. She is president and chairman of the board of Maryland Votes for Animals. I encourage you to go to their website, www.voteanimals.org, and you can sign up for their legislative alerts. You can volunteer. There's links to our state legislators of who to call for what reasons and what bills. Before we get to the last few bills that you all know will be introduced, I mentioned that I think it's really important to appreciate how much preparatory work goes into pre-session preparations. I think I just repeated myself with 2 words, but it doesn't matter. You got the gist of it. Talk to us a bit about how you do that and how you select which legislation you introduce and in what order.
Well, it's very interesting. I'd like to tell you that there's an exact science or an exact process, but I would say in general, we find out about a need either through an advocate or a legislator, or we see something, a bill that passes in another state. We also are apprised of issues going on in Maryland or around the city, the country, in other states, and we start looking and saying, is this something that we need to take care of in Maryland? Is this something that we need? Is there a law against this? What can we do about this? And we start investigating. And so we just start meeting with people and doing research and really just sort of, a lot of our work, I think, is done in these various meetings. And then we sort of get together with other animal groups. We deal with the professional animal workers of Maryland, and they're from the Animal Control Agency, shelters and rescues from all around the state. We work very closely with the Humane Society of the United States, for example, Animal Legal Defense Fund, and we work together. I'm also was just appointed to the Mayor's Anti-Animal Abuse Commission.
Oh, wonderful.
I was a guest.
Congratulations.
For the last, 3 years, but was officially appointed, quite frankly, it was a matter of just a lot of mayors. Oh. So we finally, if you know where I'm coming from, I won't go into it, but that's kind of how it took a long time to get many of us on the board because that kept happening. So anyway, that's really how it happens. And then we all get together, and when we find out that there are so many groups that are all affected by something, everyone says, okay, let's do it. And then we start going to legislators, and we start saying, look, would this interest you? Is this something you're passionate about? Do you think your constituents, would feel that this is something you should be supporting? And most of the time, we get a lot of enthusiasm from legislators because, animal issues, by and large, are important to voters. And legislators who get behind them, I think sometimes, many, many years ago, people thought maybe 10 years ago that they weren't so important. They were kind of soft issues.
Yeah.
No one cared about them. Now, you just can see, even just in television advertising, all of a sudden every car ad has a dog in it.
Yeah.
So people understand the power of animals. And, if you want somebody to take a look at you in your ad, throw a puppy in it.
Of course. And when you start to begin to see these changes, like, if New Zealand or other countries start naming all animals as sentient beings, and then the Non-Human Rights Project, which argues on behalf of autonomy and insists on freedom for, career animals.
They do amazing work. Absolutely.
Yeah. And what they're doing is really advancing what has already been proven in science, that the brains of animals and humans are very similar. To torture an animal to believe that you can learn something about a human from doing it is absurd. There are projects at Johns Hopkins where they have no abuse of animals, and then there are others where they have laboratories where they torture millions of animals. And I know you all were effective last year in getting some of the beagles out of research adopted if they survived.
Yes, exactly. Maryland became the 7th state to pass the humane adoption of companion animals, which we called the Beagle Bill.
Right.
And it kept dogs and cats after they had been used in testing, that the research institutions would have to partner with shelters and rescues so that those animals could live fulfilling lives after paying more than their debt to society. And, there's been a lot of success with that. And these animals have found wonderful homes, and they're wonderful pets.
So another bill we've not talked about that you all hope to introduce is required training of animal control and humane society officers.
Yes, and this is a good example when you're talking about how legislation evolves. The Professional Animal Workers Society of Maryland actually approached Maryland Votes for Animals and the Humane Society and asked us if we would work on this bill, and we said, well, absolutely. They said that they feel that it should be something that should be required, because these are really they're kind of law enforcement.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and they're coming in when they hear reports of abuse, and they can be seizing people's animals. Basically, and that's something that's very intrusive for people.
And traumatic, depending on the situation.
Very.
For most people.
Exactly. So this would, the counties would be responsible for having some sort of training. This is another bill that, as you can tell from listening to me, is still a little bit under construction in terms of that training, and also that it would have a continuing education portion to it. So it's still a little bit under construction. We're kind of a week or two out from having a better sense of exactly how that bill is going to be read and getting a sponsor. But this is also a bill that really both sides of the aisle like, because getting training for law enforcement, as you can imagine, is quite popular for both groups, and helping animals and having standardization in the state of this kind of training is something that, is beneficial for everyone.
Definitely. So these are 8 or 9 bills, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'll go back over them. A ban on cosmetic testing on animals, a ban on wildlife killing contests, a ban on the pesticide chlorpyrifos, which is a neurotoxin, a ban on balloon releases because wildlife get strangled or eat them or choke to death on them, prohibition on declawing cats, other than if they can't for medical reasons, extreme weather bill, which makes sure that dogs and other animals are not subjected to extreme weather, and then these other bills, the pet custody, which closes a loophole in Maryland law so that custody of animals is part of separation and divorce, and then the last one, required training of animal control and humane society officers. I work with a lot of activists, and I tend to always ask them the same question, regardless of what spectrum they work in, is how do they decide out of the 20 wish list which 10 to do? I mean, mine would be to ban hunting. That's where I'd start. My first one would be no hunting in the state of Maryland anymore.
Right. Well, and this is why I was giving you all my caveats, talking about how, actually, I sat next to the head of the Maryland Hunting Coalition. We worked together on a bill to ban shooting, a bill that was introduced to allow shooting of deer at nighttime because people didn't like them on their property. So his arguments were that it was not responsible to jacklight, which is to put these lights to spotlight these deer and then shoot them. It wasn't responsible hunting practices. And you had to see the committee. Really, if you want to talk about having bipartisan, cooperation from all sides of the aisle, I said, this you need to take a picture of. Here's Bill Miles, and there I am, and there's Emily Hovermail from the Humane Society, and we're talking about how it's cruel to shoot animals in general and about hunting, but we all were agreeing, at least just don't hunt them at night. So it's just a lot of Venn diagrams. That's really what we do. We say,
You're a very patient person.
On this thing, don't. Yes, very much. I mean, and you really have to be. You sort of have to check your emotions and say, look, we have to go for what we can win. And, for example, when you're talking about the extreme weather bill, that bill right now just applies to dogs. So, we discussed about doing cats, and it became a little bit problematic. People, in terms of feral cats, etc. So we said, okay, let's look at just doing dogs this session because we have no statewide bill at all.
Well, now I understand why your BA in International Relations from the University of Penn has made a difference, and your MBA in Marketing and Advertising from Tulane. It's like, and your A.B. Freeman School of Business degree. I mean, it's almost like everything you've done has given you a tool for this kind of very compassionate and procedural work. I really respect that. I mean, when I fought food irradiation and pesticides and a bunch of stuff, I was a full-time broadcaster, and I was just ballistic. I mean, I didn't understand how anybody could be calm. And when I first got introduced to 5G, I'm calmer now that I kind of understand it a little better. But when I'm first introduced to these horrendous realities that humans perpetrate, whether it's on the environment, on each other, or on the animals, my first response is I cry. And then my second response is I get furious. And then it takes me a couple months or sometimes even a year or two before I can calm down enough to actually participate in the civil discussion of these things, because I just don't understand, again, this issue of where humans grant themselves entitlement and prerogative to do such abysmal things to the environment, to each other, and to animals. I just don't even understand how people give themselves the moral authority to say, sure, I can go hunt if I feel like it. Why not? I mean, I can understand it in the olden days or somewhere where you hunt because you have to eat. But most hunters do it because they enjoy killing. It's not because they need to. They do it because they like the sport of killing, and they call that sport, and that's pretty much what war is. And I always feel like all these things are so connected, and that if you didn't hunt when you were a kid, you wouldn't be real excited about fighting in a war either.
And it's how we talk about it. Why is it called hunting? Why isn't killing?
Yeah, it
Why
should be
don't
called
we say,
murder.
Why, if a father said, hey, kids, we're going out to do killing this morning, how would that be?
Exactly. Let's go murder today. It is premeditated murder. That's what I've always argued.
Well, you can always give me a call. I'll be listening. Trust
you can be my new therapist.
Yeah, the two of us. Believe me, we have a big support group. I just want to thank you so much for the work that you do, because what you do really raises awareness, and people, for all the different groups that you have on your show, allows all of us advocates to get our messages out to hopefully make the world a more compassionate place. I mean, I won't get too political, but I got to tell you, we need all the help we can get right now.
No, get political. We have a few minutes.
I have to tell you, I have walked bills around, that Beagle bill, different bills, for politicians, and they have pictures of the president in their office, and I say to myself, oh, Lord, what am I doing? But then it's for the animals. And I say to myself, you just got to go for the good that you can go for.
Well, that's the beautiful way to see it. And I, used to be able to, when I was a little younger, I would get so ferocious about each issue, and they would take a couple years. When I fought food irradiation, I've told people the lobbyists called me Chicken Little. We did. And I said, I'll wear that proudly right next to Little Moses, another radio nickname. But it really does take a great deal of patience. I know the neonicotinoid laws that we were able to pass, that took almost 12 years of activity.
Absolutely.
And
we worked
fracking
on that.
in Maryland. Yep. The Chesapeake Climate Action Network and others, they worked on that 8 years before it
we
passed.
were not a lead on that. We were fortunate enough to be a part of the team.
Yeah.
And just as we are for the chlorpyrifos bill, we are a member of the Smart on Pesticides Coalition, and I'm proud to say Maryland Votes for Animals, there are probably 93 members, including, large organizations, national and international, but we are the only animal group that has taken a position as going to be a part of this fight. So I've thrown down the gauntlet to other animal organizations saying, we got to get out of our silos. These chemicals affect everyone.
Oh, absolutely.
4 legs and 2 legs. So I'm hoping to see that. They were very excited that we decided to be members. I said, and as soon as I mention it, animal people get passionate about pesticides.
Well, you
So
need to.
we're looking forward to working on that.
People forget they go and spray their lawn because they don't like the dandelions. Well, the dandelions are the things that are so great for the bees and all the other wild weeds that grow. And the less of us who have cemetery-grade lawns, the healthier the world will be and the longer we'll live. And I spent years, literally studying the dockets, and I just could not believe. I remember once going to a hearing, and an administrator from the state was talking about a certain chemical, and he said it was so safe he'd give it to his children to eat. And I had a compassionate heart in that moment and just started weeping, thinking this man is serious.
Listen, they had a pregnant woman testifying in favor of chlorpyrifos at the hearing last year.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. It was just kind of unbelievable. I thought it was really the cheapest trick that I had ever seen.
Well, I remember when I fought food irradiation, the lobbyists showed up at the legislative session with all these irradiated strawberries, which won't rot for a month, basically. And that's what they wanted to do, was set up radiators, nuclear radiators, folks, in our communities to irradiate all our food, to make it sterile so it wouldn't have any blemishes and there wouldn't be anything wrong with it. Meanwhile, there's absolutely not a scintilla of vital force left in it, lest we also talk about the expansion of nuclear waste and shipping nuclear materials around the country by train.
Absolutely.
These people were serious.
Yeah. Oh, I know. This pregnant woman was talking about how she drank the water and they had chlorpyrifos and it didn't hurt her baby. And I thought, I can't even.
I know. Ignorance is sometimes bliss, sometimes it's a horrible weapon. Well, Lisa Radov, you do a beautiful job as president and chairman of the board for Maryland Votes for Animals. Go to www.voteanimals.org. Don't forget the Maryland General Assembly convenes January 8th. Get busy.
Like us on Facebook. That's a really easy way to see what's going on. Like Maryland Votes for Animals on Facebook.
Maryland Votes for Animals on Facebook and www.voteanimals.org.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.
I hope